Alright folks, welcome to After Effects. I feel confident that you'll all be able to learn and conquer many aspects of After Effects during this course, and I'm pretty stoked to see the motion-based illustrations that you create throughout the semester. So let's jump into it. First off, I'm going to run through the basic tools and areas you'll need to become familiar with in the program. I'm creating a new file, and once this is created, you'll be able to create a new composition. You can create multiple compositions within one file. We will be using the following settings for this exercise. HDTV 1080-24. This sets the width to 1920 and height to 1080 with a frame rate of 24. Let's go ahead and change the duration to 10 seconds. Your background color will not show in the final movie file, so it's up to you to choose this. I would suggest a neutral color like black, white, or gray. To zoom in and out of the composition panel, press Apple minus and Apple plus, just like in other Adobe programs like Photoshop and Illustrator. At times, you may want to change your resolution. It should be set at auto to start with, but sometimes when your animation starts to get complicated, lowering the resolution for the preview will allow it to play quicker and at real time. You can toggle transparency on and off. This will take out the background color of the composition, making it transparent. This does not affect the final outcome of the project, just the previewing of it in the program. You can toggle on and off grids, rulers, and guides. You create guides just like in other Adobe programs. Turn on rulers, then click and drag from the ruler onto your composition. Now looking at our project panel, this is where any layers that are created within your composition, as well as any files that are imported into your composition will be. Keep this organized by creating folders for your layers and compositions to live within. Next up, let's take a quick look at our timeline. This is the bottom portion of the screen. Here is our time indicator. Click and drag this across the timeline to move throughout your composition's time. Press spacebar to allow the composition to play. Now we'll look at the basics of the tools in After Effects. Take a look at the top left part of the screen. First up is the selection tool. Hotkey is V. When working in After Effects, you want to live within the selection key. This is like your home base. After using any tool, once you're finished, always return to the selection key because it allows you to not only select layers within your composition panel, but also to select and move layers and keyframes in the timeline as well. The selection tool is your friend. Next is the hand tool. Hotkey is to hold spacebar. Then click and drag with the mouse, just like in other Adobe programs. This allows you to move the composition around within this panel. Then the magnifying glass. I never use this. Just use the hotkeys of Apple, minus, and Apple plus to zoom in and out. The rotate and camera tool will not be utilized at this time. The next tool is the pan behind tool. This can be especially important when rotating objects, as it moves an object's center anchor point. We'll talk more about this in a later tutorial. Next up is the shape tool. This works identical to Photoshop and Illustrator. Click and hold the rectangle tool to find other shapes such as a rounded rectangle, star shape, or circle. You can adjust the properties such as the fill and stroke at the top of the toolbar. It's important to note, if you have a layer selected in the timeline and attempt to make a shape, you will instead make a mask. If you try to make the shape and it is not appearing correctly, double check you do not have a layer selected on the timeline before proceeding. I'll go ahead and make a rectangle here. Once my rectangle is created, it now appears within my timeline as a shape layer. Come back to my selection tool so I can move the shape around on my composition. To center a layer on the composition, I can hit Apple Home. I'll click off my shape layer in the timeline so it is not selected. Then I will use the pen tool to create another shape. Again, I can adjust the properties of the shape, such as its color and stroke. Now I will add some type by using the Type tool. Shortcut is Command T. In our Properties panel on the right side of the screen, we can adjust the font type, size, and other properties. Using the Selection tool, we can also adjust the size of the type as well as move it with our composition. To rename your layers, select one and press Enter. then rename to stay organized. By clicking the down arrow by the layer, you will expand the numerous properties that can be adjusted within the timeline. I'm going to adjust the position property. A much easier way to reach this property is to select the layer and simply press P for position. By clicking the stopwatch, I am enabling the use of keyframes to adjust the layer's position. Notice, as this is pressed, a blue dot called a keyframe is created where the time indicator was on the timeline. To create an animation of the layer's position, we must now create a second keyframe. I will move the time indicator, then, with the selection tool, I can move the layer to its desired location at that point in the timeline. Once it is moved, a new keyframe will be created. Pressing spacebar to play the composition will showcase the animation of the layer moving from its first position to its second position. After a keyframe is created, changing where it is on the timeline is simple. Click and drag it with the selection tool. If the selected keyframe is moved to the left, the animation will appear faster. And if it is moved to the right, the animation will appear slower. Now I will add movement to the next shape layer. Select the layer with the timeline. Press P to bring up the position property. Click the stopwatch to enable keyframing. Use the selection tool to move the layers to its starting point. Move the time indicator to the desired time. Then move the layer to its endpoint, which creates a second keyframe. Adjust keyframes to change the timing of the animation. Another universal property that can be animated is the opacity of a layer. The hotkey is T. I remember this by thinking of opacity as transparency. I want the type to end at 100% opacity, so I will move the time indicator to where I want the end of its animation to be, and I'll click the stopwatch to enable keyframe. This sets that keyframe at 100%. Now I will move the time indicator to where I want the type to start appearing. I'll click the diamond to the left of the screen and then adjust the 100% type to 0%. Let's watch the animation by pressing spacebar. I've decided to make the animation a bit shorter, so I can adjust this by clicking and dragging the work area to the left. To adjust a keyframe after it is already created, move the time indicator to the same position as the keyframe, then select the keyframe. After it is selected, you can then make adjustments. Now remember, we have yet to put in an actual background for this composition. If we toggle on our transparency, you will see that there is no background. To create one, right-click in the Layers section of the timeline. Select New, Solid. The solid layer will automatically be sized to fit the full composition. Rename and adjust to the desired color, then press OK. I'm going to just select black. Notice, however, that it is now in front of your existing layers. To bring it behind these, select the layer, click and drag to the bottom of your Layers panel to place behind the existing ones. Let's watch our animation one more time, and then we will export. Select Composition at the top toolbar, then add to Render Queue. Leave Render Settings at Best Settings. Click on Lossless under the Output module to open an Options panel. We'll change a few more options there. For Format, we will select QuickTime. Leave all options for video output. However, I'm going to change the format options. Change from animation to Apple ProRes 444, which is the industry standard. Click OK. Click on Output to select where to save the movie on your computer, and then name the file. Lastly, press Render on the right side of the screen. Let's go ahead and watch our animation. So now you will be following along to practice using After Effects. For this exercise, you do not have to end up with the exact same colors or placement of the shapes and/or type. However, you will need to follow all of the steps. Let's start out by creating a new composition. We will use the same settings as the previous example, HDTV 1080-24. Change the duration to 15 seconds. Step 1. Create a background. Right-click in the Layers panel. Select New, Solid. Select your desired color. Step 2. Create a rounded rectangle. Adjust the color and stroke. Notice that I have locked my background layer, so I won't be able to select it. This will save you time and frustration. Step 3. Create Position Type layer. Place Position Type on top of created rounded rectangle. Step 4. Align the rectangle and type to be centered. Find the Align panel on the right side of the screen. If this is not visible on your screen, select Window on top toolbar, Workspace, then Essential Graphics. This will alter the way your screen looks a bit, and will also show the Align tab panel. Ensure the Align Layers to is set to selection. Select both layers. Press the Center vertically and Center horizontally buttons. Step 5. Rename layers. Rename the rectangle to Position Rectangle. Step 6. Create Position Animation. Select Rectangle, press P to open up Position property, move Time Indicator to the ending point of the animation, press the stopwatch to enable keyframing, move Time Indicator to start point of animation, use Selection tool to move the layer to the desired starting point. By holding Shift while moving layer, it will lock any movement to just horizontal or vertical movement. Move keyframe to adjust timing. Step 7. Set up Pick Whip. An easy way to have one layer follow the same animation of another layer is to use Pick Whips. Select the type layer, click and drag the spiral shape, which is called the Pick Whip, and drag it to the rectangle layer. Now when we play the animation, notice the type layer follows the same movement of the rectangle layer. Step 8. Select the Polygon tool. Click and drag to create the shape, but while holding down the mouse, click up and down on your arrow keys to determine how many points the polygon will have. Lower the amount of points to 3 to create a triangle. Before letting go of the mouse, hold Shift to have the triangle sitting perfectly up and down. Use the Selection tool to move the triangle to the desired location and change the color properties of it. Step 9. Create the type. You can create this by using the Type tool again. In the video, I've duplicated the existing type layer by selecting it and hitting Apple D. Then using the Selection tool, moving it to the desired location. However, you will need to change the parent and link to none. Looking back, it probably would have been easier to just create a new type layer with the Type tool, which is what I would suggest you do during the exercise. Step 10. Create Rotate Animation. Select the triangle layer, press R to bring up the rotation property of the layer. Move the time indicator to the starting point of the animation. Press the stopwatch to enable keyframing. Move the time indicator to the end of the animation. Adjust the rotation degrees to 360. The triangle will do one full rotation during the time between the two keyframes. Step 11. Set up Pick Whip. Select the Rotate Type layer. Click and drag the spiral shape, which is called the Pick Whip, and drag it to the triangle layer. Now when we play the animation, notice the type layer follows the same rotation of the triangle. Step 12. Select the Star tool. Click, drag and hold. While holding down the mouse, press the up and down arrow to change the amount of points the star has. Then, while still holding the mouse down, hold Apple and move the mouse. This will change the height of the spikes in the star. Let go of the mouse once the desired star shape is created. Adjust the color properties of the star and move to the desired location with the Selection tool. Step 13. Create the type. Use the type tool to create opacity type layer. Adjust color, size, and position. Making a few more adjustments to the position of our different assets using the selection tool. Step 14. Create opacity animation. Select star layer in the timeline. Press T for opacity. Move the time indicator to the starting point. Either click the stopwatch to enable keyframing, or just change the 100% to 0%. This tool will enable keyframing and create a keyframe at this point in the timeline. Move the time indicator to the end point of the opacity animation, then change the 0% to 100%. Step 15. Set up pick whip. When setting up a pick whip for opacity, you must select the opacity property first. See here when I attempt to pick whip the type layer to the star layer, the opacity animation does not translate. Instead, first select the opacity type layer, press T to open up the opacity property, then pick whip the opacity property to the opacity layer of the star. Now the animation is the same on both layers. Now I'm just adjusting the timing of the keyframes a bit. Step 16. Create a shape using the pen tool. Select the pen tool. Click to create a shape. Click and drag with the pen tool to create rounded corners. Adjust color, size, and position. Step 17. Create the type. Use Type tool to create Wiggle type layer. Adjust color, size, and position. Step 18. Create Wiggle animation. Select Created Shape and press P to open Position property. This time, instead of just clicking the stopwatch, first hold Alt/Option and then click the stopwatch. This opens the expressions for the Position property. Select the type box and type out Wiggle 1010 and press Enter. This will have the shape randomly wiggle for the entirety of the animation. Keyframes are not created for this expression. The first value in the expression represents how fast the wiggle will happen, while the second value represents the magnitude of the wiggle. Experiment with changing these numbers a bit. Step 19. Once you're satisfied with the wiggle, pick whip the wiggle type layer to the wiggle shape. Step 20. Create loop out expression. Select the rotation property of the triangle layer by selecting a layer and pressing R. Then hold Alt/Option and press the stopwatch to open the expressions for this property. Type in the text box loop out. Now the triangle rotation animation will continue to loop for the duration of the entire composition. Notice how this expression also applies to the rotate type layer since it was pick whipped already. Step 21. Duplicating keyframes. In some instances, you may want to copy and paste keyframes to have a specific animation loop back and forth. For example, let's have the opacity of our star continue to appear and disappear for the duration of the composition. Select the triangle layer and press T for opacity. Use the selection tool and click and drag to select the two keyframes. Apple C to copy. Move the timeline indicator, Apple V to paste. Step 22. Duplicate the keyframes for the position rectangle as well. Select the rounded rectangle and press P. Select the keyframes. Apple C to copy. Move the timeline indicator. Apple V to paste. Step 23. Easy ease. Many simple animations in After Effects can oftentimes seem a bit robotic. To make these animations feel a bit more lifelike, add Easy Ease to the keyframes. Select the desired keyframes by clicking and dragging to select them. Right-click on a keyframe. Select Keyframe Assistant, then Easy Ease. This essentially makes the movement ease into the stopping points and ease out of the stopping points. Step 24. Add in some inspirational type. This step is optional. Step 25. Create a mask. Create a new solid. Right-click in the Layers panel. Select New, Solid. Select any color, as this won't be seen in the final composition. Right-click on Layer and select Mask. New Mask. Now we will make a pre-composition with the remaining layers we've created, which is pretty simple. Select all the layers except the top mask and the locked background by clicking on the farthest top of these layers, holding Shift, and then clicking on the farthest bottom of these layers. Once they are all selected, press Shift, Apple, and C. When the dialog box appears, you can rename it if you would like, and select the options shown in this video. Essentially, this is grouping all these layers together so they can all be treated as one similar grouping of layers in Photoshop or Illustrator. By double-clicking on the new pre-composition, you enter into the group. To return back to the entire composition, simply press the X next to the pre-composition at the top of the timeline. Change Add to Subtract, which means anywhere the mask is located, it will stop the layer below it from showing. To make our mask active on the new pre-composition group, change the track matte to Alpha Matte. Notice how all of our created layers are not visible. My goal here is to slowly showcase the animated assets we've made by having the mask's position move from the left side of the composition to the right. To accomplish this, we will enable keyframes for the mask path by clicking the stopwatch by this property. First keyframe, I want the mask to be covering the entire composition, so the positioning should be correct for the initial keyframe at the beginning of our timeline. Then, move the time indicator to the stopping point for the mask to be fully off the composition, and then click and hold Shift and drag the mask all the way to the right side of the screen of the composition. If done correctly, when we play the animation, the mask will slowly reveal our assets, starting from the left side of the screen until they have all been revealed. Again, if we want to edit our pre-composition, double-click on it. Within this pre-composition group, you can still edit the different assets within it. Here, by sliding the wiggle shape and type assets to the right on the timeline, I am adjusting their starting point within the animation. Feel free to adjust the position of all the different assets or to experiment with different timing and/or colors. For now, I will move on to exporting. Depending on how long and complicated your animation is, exporting can take a bit of time to accomplish. So as you're working up to a deadline for a project, make sure to include extra time to export the file. Go to Composition, Add to Render Queue. We go to our render queue and we will adjust some settings. These are the standard settings you will use for this course unless otherwise stated. Leave render settings at best settings. Click on the output module to make a few changes. In the dialog box, format should be set to QuickTime. All of the video output settings should automatically match what is shown here. RGB, millions of colors, and pre-multiplied. Click on Format Options. Change video codec to Apple PROS 444, then click OK. Click the Render button on the right side of the screen. Notice, it will showcase the estimated time remaining and a blue progress bar works across the screen. Now find your file and watch it. These are the basics of After Effects. A lot was covered in this tutorial. A whole lot. You will find throughout this course that these basic aspects of After Effects will help enable you to achieve 90% of what you want in your motion-based illustrations. Best of luck.